Chapter 8. I thought I was trapped in a realm of darkness, but then my eyelids slowly began to open. All around me was nothing but light. Had I really left the realm of the living? No, I couldn't have. As the distortion of my vision began to clear at last, my eyes cringed shut in pain, unprepared for the blinding onslaught of fluorescent light bulbs. A ceiling? It took a few moments to regain total consciousness before I realized I was in a hospital room. I gathered as much strength as I could and scanned my whereabouts. I was tucked in tightly under a heavy warm blanket, unable to move anything besides my head. I expected the room to be empty, but I wasn't alone. I stopped when I saw Monica sitting in a chair at my bedside. Words cannot express her relief to see me awake. She rushed out of the room and returned with 4 other followers, 3 of whom I recognized almost immediately, but refused to believe the coincidence of it all. Monica exited for a moment to fetch a doctor and my 3 childhood friends. I never expected to see Michael, Nathan, and especially not Joey again either. Especially not here of all places. The doctor took the liberty of explaining what happened to bring me here. I suffered an overdose caused by the painkillers and almost died had I arrived at the hospital even a minute later. It was Monica who discovered me when she stopped by my apartment, wanting to apologize for storming off and to end things between us on a more pleasant note than previously. She knocked twice at the door, but heard no answer. She knew I was home since my car was still there and barged through the unlocked door when she heard my body hit the floor. Monica panicked when she saw the gun near my hand, but reevaluated the situation when she couldn't find any traces of blood at the scene. She called for an ambulance, knowing something was still wrong since I was out cold, even if I wasn't immediately dead. My stomach was pumped of the drugs, but I had fallen into a coma for 2 weeks. During the time I was unconscious, Monica called around to try and alert someone of my condition. She tried to reach my parents, but neither of them showed much concern. I wouldn't have expected them to. Yet, somehow, she managed to get a hold of the guys. Joey was passing through Lanston the day of my overdose and contacted Mike and Nathan immediately. They each rushed down to the hospital to check on me and had been camping out outside the room for a few days, waiting for me to come to. It was strange. I almost didn't recognize any of them since I hadn't seen them in years, and they changed so much. I had to picture their child forms at first in order to notice the resemblances. The doctor made a comment on how fortunate I should have felt to be alive at all, that I was lucky Monica had shown up when she did, that the door was unlocked, and that he was able to operate on me when he did and essentially save my life. I wanted to punch the guy right in the throat. The last thing I felt was lucky. Fate had just taken my brother away from me, and before slipping into unconsciousness, I discovered the real, twisted nature of my mother. I was planning to kill her at first, and then tried to take my own life. I had been through so much psychological hell, and I was supposed to somehow feel grateful? I held back and didn't say any of what I was thinking, since I knew he probably didn't mean any offense, and there was no way anyone could have known what I was thinking before the overdose happened. He was right, after all. Most people in my situation most likely would have died, but I had become the exception. I realized there had been way too many coincidences for any of the past events to make sense. Monica coming back after I was sure I'd never see her again, finding and being able to tend to me when she did, getting me to the hospital in time to save my life. All of my best friends were here waiting as well for me to recover when I needed their support the most, even if I didn't realize it. It was almost as if I had some sort of guardian angel watching over me. Monica heavily scolded me since she prematurely thought I killed myself with a gun when she found me. It was a scolding I anticipated receiving. The gun may not have been quick enough to take me, but even so, taking all those pills at once was a completely unconscious decision. I didn't intentionally try to overdose on painkillers, even if it did happen in the end. However, if the pills hadn't taken effect when they did, the gun would have most certainly finished me. Thankfully, because of those pills, I had a chance to be saved. If it had been the gun, I would have been dead in an instant. Monica was still angry at me since we broke up, but she would never have wished suicide upon me. I may have broken her heart, but I was still a human being, and deep down, she wished for my recovery from my depression despite conflicting feelings she had towards me. She missed the real Stephen, the one who asked her to the high school prom with a rose and card and showed her the evening of her life. The man whom she danced with at her brother's wedding. She missed the pleasant, optimistic, charismatic, and happy Stephen that defined my character in her eyes. Truth be told, I was a naturally happy person not so long ago, courtesy of my brother. Things took a drastic turn for the worst, of course, with his passing, and soon the severity of my depression was clear to Monica. Suddenly, the idea that I might have contemplated suicide after she left, as a final nail in the coffin, didn't seem so ridiculous to her when she realized it. She calmed down and lowered her tone as the entirety of the situation sunk in. I didn't tell Monica or the guys about my dad's letter, Bradley's condition, my mother's involvement in the entire affair, or my discarded plan to eliminate her. It pained me to think about any of that looking back from it, and I certainly wasn't ready to hear any outside input on the matter if I couldn't decide how I felt about everything myself. Bradley was gone, and I missed him terribly. That much was clear to me. I felt bad for not coming clean with the people I'd come to call my best friends and my girlfriend. Nathan, Mike, and Joey were all there for me even before Bradley came along. We had done so much together, yet I allowed time to sever my ties with them. I discarded them from my mind, and yet they still seemed to care for me. And Monica had shown me that there was so much more to life than just what I could experience with my brother. She helped me find a place in the real world. She loved me, and I betrayed her. Maybe I felt threatened by my feelings with her. Bradley had been the person I trusted more than anyone, but maybe as I began to trust Monica as much, my old trust felt threatened. Absurd as it sounds, perhaps during my depression I felt that by trusting Monica, I was worried deep down that I would lose my memory of Bradley and replace it with that of Monica. Maybe during my time of weakness I couldn't realize that I had ruined my heart for the both of them. So in a fit of confusion I must have removed Monica from my life, thinking it would solve everything, even though it didn't. Because I spent so much time with my brother, I never learned to accept other people as highly as I accepted him, and now with Bradley gone, my friends were all I had left. I didn't know how I could begin to truly appreciate the four of them. I tried to look at my mother's actions from her point of view and make sense of it, but with little success. I couldn't decide if it was truly right for me to hate her, or if I just wasn't looking at the big picture. And what about Dad? Sure, he had abandoned his family for several years, but in the end he came out and told me the truth. Not just about Bradley and Mom, but about his behavior himself. He wasn't trying to ignore his boys. He simply had faith in me to watch over his second-born son and was handing the reins over to me. He granted me a monumental responsibility that I would have accepted proudly had he told me all of this from the beginning. Why didn't he tell me until that letter? Was he worried that Mom would find out that he had abandoned faith in her? More importantly, could I still hate my father after he chose to enlighten me on the truth about my family's past and innermost secrets? I had so much to think about and didn't know where to begin. While I was resting in the hospital room, I thought more and more about my stroll up to death's doorstep. Instantly, I felt the same feeling I experienced 2 weeks prior when I looked in the mirror and regained control over my fury. Was I really going to accept murder as the best solution to my problems? And after, did I really think suicide was the best way out of all of it? No, none of it could have been true. When I pondered deeply about it, I believed that my emotions were holding the trigger and ready to pull it, not my logic or my sanity. I believed that the real me was there all along, but was drowning in the pools of anger inside as it tried to regain control. The real me must have reached through and snapped me out of my primitive trance when I looked in the mirror. I was alive now, and to Monica and my friends, that was all that mattered. But it wasn't enough for me. I didn't have the slightest clue how to think about anything that had just happened to me or where to go from here. If I hadn't read Dad's letter, I wouldn't have become as distraught as to even think of pulling out the gun for any reason. It all happened in the spur of the moment, but I believe now that my sanity was still residing inside of my mind somewhere deep down. However, it had been clouded by so many hateful, horrific thoughts that I couldn't manage to control myself from feeling such negative emotions. As I laid there wrapped deep in my thoughts, I felt like I couldn't remember how to be sane as I once was. Losing my brother, one of the most important people in my life, destroyed my optimism in humanity and the hopes that I would ever find my happily ever after. I still had Monica and the guys, but I didn't feel worthy of having their blessing, so I couldn't accept them as a part of me. The revelation, my previous plans for murder, followed by this near-death experience I faced, my mind had become thoroughly corrupt. I didn't feel like myself anymore, as if I had been overshadowed by a demon, and despite my best efforts to remove it, it still had a firm hold over me. I was in no condition to leave the hospital anytime soon, but I wasn't in any hurry to check out anyway. I no longer felt like I had a home anymore. I couldn't just return to my apartment alone and pretend everything was back to normal. This entire experience had left me with far too much to think about, to the point where I would never return to a normal routine. I certainly had no place at home either, and it was the last place I wanted to be. While I had lost all desire to go through with killing my mother, I didn't know if it was right to hate her or not, so I resolved to simply not trust her. There was no way I would ever return to her company, especially not after learning her secret about Bradley. It completely changed how I felt about her. All my friends eventually picked up on the fact that my mental stability was in shambles without me needing to say a word, and they recommended I seek psychological help. Under normal circumstances, I would have resisted. As a kid, I always had a grudge against psychologists and people trying to tell me there was something wrong with my head. But now I knew my head was in pretty bad shape, so I agreed to enroll in therapy sessions once I made a full physical recovery. I didn't know what to expect going in to receive mental rehabilitation. It wasn't as bad as I had imagined when I was a kid. My specialized psychologist, Dr. Truman, and I became close friends before long. Monica and the others paid me occasional visits the first few days, but Dr. Truman soon requested that they stopped. He described that my traumatic experiences had formed tight mental barriers within my thoughts, and those memories of the incidents were sealed off. Any remnants of the outside world could instantly bring those horrific memories back. In order to remove the mental barriers of my mind, as well as to pacify those gruesome memories, I had to isolate myself from the outside world, and so I did. I trained with Dr. Truman every day, slowly and carefully easing my mind back to its natural state. I learned to organize and control my memories. I quickly became able to discard the memories that had little importance to me and kept only the most treasured ones. It's a technique I still make full use of to this day. While it essentially cripples my mental capacity in comparison to that of most other people, it has never bothered me much. People tend to cram their minds full of useless information. The disorganized mess quickly leads them to forgetting precious memories and retain less than favorable ones. I choose only what I want to remember. I only desire to remember the memories that have ever made me feel anything. Any good or bad emotions? I'm not particular. I'd rather feel something than nothing at all.